Good afternoon, Pueblo, and this is Bree Pappan bringing you another episode of State of Art from the Pueblo podcast from Pueblo Star Journal. And I am really excited to have my guest with me in the studio today. We're taking it back to a community focus with members of the Pueblo Musicians Hangout. And in the studio today, I have Marc Sabatella, Aaron Zimola, and Brock Kilgore. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having us here.
No problem. Thank you. Marc, I want to just start by having an introduction of everybody. So I'm really happy to have you back to my podcast. This is your second visit to the State of Art podcast. You were here at my inaugural podcast with the Pueblo Sketchers, and which is a phenomenal group of artists that go around Pueblo every Sunday, and they sketch and have a meeting and kind of a meeting of the minds and talent, and it's just a wonderful thing. And I'm really happy to have you back. And so tell us a little bit about. This is not something you're not only a part of it, but this is you're the brainchild behind the hangout. So tell me a little bit about you as a musician and how the Pueblo Musicians Hangout came to be.
All right. So my name is Marc Sabatella, and I am a musician primarily, although also a visual artist. And jazz piano is kind of my main focus, but also I have a strong classical background and, listened to my fair amount of the Beatles growing up, etc. So I arrived in Pueblo from Denver last year and immediately started trying to get involved. And also mention I have an art background. For a while, I was kind of thinking that was maybe going to be parallel careers when I was in Denver, but at some point music won out and art became more the side thing. When I came to Pueblo, I was looking to find other musicians and other artists, and what I quickly came to realize, in part through the Urban Sketchers, was that the art community is really well developed, really well integrated, well supported. There's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of good things happening in the visual art world that I wasn't seeing happen in music. And just even figuring out who the other musicians were that I would want to get to know and where I would find them and so forth it wasn't as obvious in the way art was more like a funnel where once you show up with something, you learn about First Friday and you go and then suddenly you meet all the other artists at the galleries and so forth. And I was really missing that and did a lot more with art at first, but eventually came to realize, we need to make some things happen for music that resemble that in some way. And so that's how I came to start this Musicians Hangout, which is I guess bi-monthly, first and third Fridays at Analogue. And this was just a place for musicians to get together, but I've also then kind of expanded it with some other things that I'll get into more. That it goes beyond just the meeting in person. It's also now like, what are some things that we can actually put into place? What are some positive things we can do? And those happen in offline conversations just as much. And like the one that happened on our way in today. Yeah. These things happen, and making these things happen, that's kind of become my passion.
That's amazing. When you came to Pueblo and as you were saying, that you were kind of became immersed in what you thought was the established visual arts community, do you feel like were you meeting musicians along the way as well, or were you was it one predominant over the other, or were you kind of naturally meeting? Was it a natural meeting thing?
Yeah, I mean, I was meeting musicians, and I don't want to be misconstrued here. I'm not saying that the quality of the artists is way ahead of the quality of the musicians. There's some amazing, fantastic musicians here. It's more the sense of community that exists between the musicians. And it's not that people are unwilling. It's the infrastructure isn't there. We don't have the things that
I think it's very fluid.
Us.
I feel like the musician scene here is very fluid. People come in and come out.
There's
in terms of, and so that makes it difficult to have like an establishment.
Yeah.
If there's a constant change.
And there's just like a lot of compartmentalization of, folk musicians know each other, punk rock musicians know each other, jazz musicians, the few of us there are, know each other, classical musicians know each other. But there's the things that might cause any sort of intermixing of these things don't really exist in the way that I know can exist from other places I've lived. So yeah, that's
you're hoping to incorporate a lot of the things that you have experienced in other places and have it be more fluid.
Yes, the things that I've experienced from the music scene in other places I've lived, and also the things that I experience in the art scene here. So I know these things are possible. I know the musicians are there. I've now, a year and a half into living in Pueblo, I've gotten to know several musicians pretty well, and met, quite a few others that I don't know that well yet. But yeah, it's still a little more of a process. I feel like I actually know like most of the artists. That's a huge overstatement, I'm sure. But most of the artists in this town, I actually have gotten to know just through things. I don't even have to work that hard to do it. The things like First Friday, things all
pathways.
These things exist, and that's what I was missing, and that's what I want to see happen in music.
Okay. Hi, Aaron. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No problem. Well, talk to me a little bit about how you came to Pueblo and how you found out about the Pueblo Musicians Hangout.
Right, yeah. So I'm new, kind of like Marc, to Pueblo. I moved here about a year ago from Greeley, so just up north. And the reason I came to Pueblo is actually because of housing and property prices. I worked for a while as an economic analyst for the state legislature, and I was working on housing and healthcare and taxes. And
we really need you then. We need you here in Pueblo.
Well, yeah, maybe. And so what ended up happening is I was getting very frustrated with the state of housing within our state, within Colorado, because there's some big issues that I won't go into that. There could be some solutions.
A whole other podcast.
Yeah, there could be some solutions, but in all honesty, nobody really wants to contend with those solutions. Sure. And I was getting very frustrated, and a friend of mine in the tourism department said, "Have you looked at Pueblo?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And they said, "No, you absolutely have to go look at Pueblo, because they are still kind of an untouched area as far as this inflation we're seeing. It still exists, but it's not at the same level." And so it is actually about anywhere from 30 to 50% less than the rest of the state for a metropolitan area, so a place that still has a city. And when I did
have 120,000 regular residents, is that correct?
Yes. About that. Yeah. And then the metro that the state looks at includes pretty much the entire county. So all of Pueblo County is Pueblo Metro. And within that, you have a few more residents. It's almost 250,000. And so there are still amenities here. It's not like in the middle of nowhere. There's stuff going on. And they said, you should really take a look at it. So my wife and I did take a look at it. We were going to look at Alamosa, in all honesty, first, and then we found out there's some things going on in Alamosa that prohibited us from moving there, and we just stopped here to have lunch on the way back to Greeley. And we fell in love with the downtown Riverwalk, and we ate at Angelo's. And
shameless plug.
And yes, I mean,
that's my story.
A lot of places on the Riverwalk are fantastic. And
it's the first restaurant that opened on the Riverwalk, so It's been open over 20 years.
Yeah, and we also there's another restaurant right next to it that we stopped into.
That's like 1129 Spirits and Eatery.
Yes, that one. That's the one. Yeah, and that place is awesome.
Yeah,
that place is awesome too. And so then we got a hold of our real estate agent, and we said, let's look here. And within a week, we had closed on a place in Pueblo. Yes, we had closed on a place. It was
That's lightning fast real estate.
Well, the thing is we were prepared for Northern Colorado prices. I mean, the median home price in Greeley at the time was $475,000, and it's so competitive.
More bang for your real estate buck.
Yes, down here and up in Northern Colorado, it's very competitive for housing. It's very competitive to get mortgages. My background is that I am the owner and founder of a marketing agency called Zova Marketing, and then I'm also the chief marketing officer of a mid-sized entertainment company in Los Angeles. And so what we found out is a lot of these mortgage companies just didn't want to look at K1s. I have K1s as the paperwork for my income, They said, we won't look at that. Only W-2s for what we're doing. When we were down here, we were welcomed with open arms, which was really big for us because we were really entrenched in the community up in northern Colorado, even a little bit in California, and there are gatekeepers and blocks everywhere you go. When we got to Pueblo, that did not exist as much. Not to say it doesn't exist, but it's not as intense. If you talk to people, they become much more open, whereas you could know somebody for years in northern Colorado and you still will never get in the gate. Yes, and so that's why we moved here, was because of housing, and it was fantastic. And the way that I got involved with all of this music stuff, I actually realized Mark and I know each other from UNC, where I went to school. He was teaching piano, I believe. He was sitting in for Dana Landry, who's a great, fantastic professor up at UNC, and we saw each other in the halls. I was in the violin studio, so we never really interfaced. But when I first saw Mark, I said, I think I know you.
Is that 6 degrees of Marc Sabatella?
So
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we're navigating in Marc Sabatella's world. I don't know. I just like.
No, it was kind of a wild moment. And the way that happened is I love historic buildings. That's another reason I fell in love with Pueblo. Mm-hmm. A lot of northern Colorado has razed all of theirs for various developmental reasons. And honestly, we were walking downtown by Mineral Palace Park. We had just moved here. And I said, what is that building? And it was the Impossible Players building.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And we went in and we were being a little bit weird walking around the outside of the building. And,
you were enchanted?
Yes. And, could raise some eyebrows for anybody who's actually taking care of the building. And then Loretta Bailey pops her head out and says, can I help you? And I said, yes. What is this building? And she said, why don't you come on in? I'll show you.
I'll give you the tour.
And so went in and we became friends with a lot of the people at the theater. And then they said, we're having an open house with some wine. And would you like to come to that? It'll be a fundraiser. Went to that. And then we met a couple of musicians at that who then invited us to the Sugar Cube House, which is Jay Rosenberg. Mm-hmm. And so, Phil Van Garrick, who plays a lot of great music.
He is such a unique musician.
Yes.
I've had the pleasure of booking him for several events that he played several times at the Art Center.
Oh, he's great.
He's such a unique and talented musician.
Oh,
very
I love
unusual.
him. And he said, you should come to this thing that's happening at the Sugar Cube House. And we went there and we met a lot of musicians, John Hawtrey and a lot of people.
Who was also amazing.
An incredible musician. And that's actually where I ended up running into Mark, was through just this sort of big soup of random meetups. And after a while I said, I think I know you. And he said,
you look really familiar.
He said, maybe. And I said, where are you from? And he said, Denver. And I said, well, no, maybe not. I lived in Aurora for a little bit. And then he said, no. And I said, well, I went to school in Greeley. And he went, that's probably where. And that's the story about how I ended up in Pueblo. Been loving Pueblo so far, and not sure what exactly the journey will be in my involvement with everything, but I'm sure it's going to grow and flourish into something that's really cool because, as I said, I think something that really piqued my interest about Pueblo is the potential is there everywhere. I mean, it is so much potential, and there are very few people that I've run into who are true gatekeepers. So I think that there's the opportunity for a lot of collaboration here.
The thing that I found in terms of what you're talking about is that there are so many things that could be developed, that there is a lot of potential for across the board projects involving the arts and probably into music, in terms of developing the downtown, preservation, all kinds of things. And it just takes one person who has the interest to bring collaborators and to bring, and a lot of people are like...
That's Mark here.
Yeah, that's
He's
Mr.
sitting
Mark.
right next to us.
In terms of there's people that have born, raised, all those things here, they never left. And then there's the people that, like yourself, like Mark, that have come to Pueblo for other reasons, but bring that same type of old soul wisdom and desire to create a sense of place. And they see it here in Pueblo. And I feel like if we have more of those collaborators, then that's how things happen here.
Exactly.
So I really think, and, this gentleman to my right is another example of one of those people. Hello, Brock. Welcome to the podcast, State of Art. Brock Kilgore, tell us about how you came to be in Pueblo and how you're involved in the Pueblo Musicians Hangout.
Okay. Well,
The summarized short version.
Yeah. It's kind of I like how you put it, a soup of chance encounters as well. I mean, I think I was born in Colorado Springs. I grew up in Black Forest, north of Colorado Springs. And I guess the first chance encounter I want to talk about, the first class I took at UCCS, was wearing a Jane's Addiction t-shirt, and it was a 3-hour class, so they gave us a smoke break in the middle, and they even called it that in 1991. And I was standing out smoking, wearing this Jane's Addiction t-shirt, and this guy named Ben Brunson walked up to me and said, "I love Jane's Addiction. I play guitar. I have a band. You should come see us practice."
Play. Yeah.
And Ben lives in Pueblo now, and you probably met Ben.
The teacher.
Yeah, the teacher. Yeah. And so I went to see their practices.
See how that happens?
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
Mark knows everybody. Yeah. And so I went to their practices. I would help them carry heavy stuff, went to their shows. And then
Initiated crew. You just got initiated.
I became a roadie, yes. And then I had a bad breakup in grad school over the summer, and they were going out on tour, and I had a broken heart, and their tour manager said that he didn't want to do it anymore, and so I dropped all my classes and lived in a school bus with 11 hippies for a little while. And then I ended up in Madison, Wisconsin, running a concert venue, an Orpheum Theater, the first air conditioner anywhere in Wisconsin. And we had Film Fest,
nice
7 to 10 concerts per month, 2,000 people. So I learned this industry professionally. And then my dad died. I came back to Colorado. I went back to grad school and tried to settle down, get married, and I drank myself to death, literally. I had a near-death experience 11 years ago, and it changed my life. But I finished up my master's degree in history and started teaching at CSU Pueblo. And for the last 11 years, I taught all the geography classes here at CSU Pueblo. And then my past caught up with me again. And while teaching geography over last summer, I had a seizure right in front of class. And it made me take a long look at my life, even though I'd been sober for 11 years. But fortunately, right before that, in a meeting for the American Association of University Professors at CSU Pueblo, they drugged me up there to tell my story about being an adjunct for 10 years and almost starving to death, working at 3 different universities for $3.33 an hour. And I told my story, including the part I just told you about going on tour and meeting Ben. And in the audience was a man named John Pluscoda, the head of the Media and Entertainment Department here at CSU Pueblo. And right in the middle of that meeting, he said, "Hey, I have this concerts, festivals, and events class. Would you like to teach it?" And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And so it was just a chance encounter in front of a meeting where I got back into the industry. So I was gone for 20 years. I don't play any instruments at all. I just carry heavy stuff and know a good deal from a bad deal.
And teach people about doing things.
Yeah, so my connection to the music meetup is also connected to that seizure. Sorry to bring up bad things, but sometimes tragedies put you back in places where you really belong, and so that tragedy put me back in the music business. So I created a lecturer position in geography by teaching as an adjunct all those years. And after that seizure, I decided to pass on the job that was created for me and continue working as an advisor and just teach these 300-level media and entertainment classes, concerts, festivals, and events, talent management, and the business of media and entertainment. And what I'm trying to do is just teach people, creative people who aren't even creative, about the reality of the business. We have one rule: the show must go on. Nothing gets between the audience and the show. And then we have 3 pitfalls, and I try to give them the street level of the music business. So I tell them the 3 things that'll get you in the music business are addiction, bad choices in personal relationships, and bad contracts. And those 3 things are at the center of every class that I teach. I never took a single class in media and entertainment. I learned it all on the job. And so it creates a situation where they read something in the book. I take them out into live events and throw them into the chaos. And
the
we
mosh
talk
pit.
about it literally. The motto for our class is "In chaos we thrive," and it came from the mosh pit. And I show them how it's supposed to be and how it really is, and the class just basically teaches itself. But after the seizure, I hadn't gone to bars in 11 years, and I grew up across the street from a biker bar, and that's really the only culture I ever knew. And so for 11 years, I was just kind of out there by myself. And after that seizure, they gave me this medication that gave me incredible anxiety. And so what I did is I went back home, and I started sitting at the bar at Analogue at the end of the bar like I used to do, drinking non-alcoholic beers. And I used that for the 6 months where they made me take this medication that took my anxiety disorder and multiplied it by 100. So I sat there at the end of the bar in pure hell. And then musicians and people that I knew started coming to see me. I started meeting people. I met Marc, and he created the musicians meetup because he knew I was already there and that people were coming to see me anyway. And so this is a great example of just an organic piece of community.
Wow. I'm kind of speechless right now. That's a miraculous story. And I think, and I've had several, I've written several stories about kind of putting things into perspective in terms of whether it's through a life experience or through witnessing something. That's an amazing thing. And I think that's having that perspective when you're talking to your students. That's not something that you can teach. It's kind of like, I've experienced this, so I'm imparting my knowledge on to you. And so that is kind of the best way to learn is through doing.
And they see those three things at every event we go to, and they wouldn't have seen that if I hadn't provided that framework. Mm-hmm. And I hate to focus on negatives, because one of the things I learned when I quit drinking and went through this stuff is you got to focus on the positives, but you got to learn from what you went through. And if I can help another generation figure out a way into the music business, either not as a performer or as a lateral move as a performer, sometimes you can make money and pay the bills by being a sound person or running lights or artist liaison or some of these other things, create opportunity, and you're not making the music directly, but you're helping disseminate the music to everybody else. I say all the time, the music business is 97% moving heavy stuff.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, because that's not the musician's perspective. So I think that's a really added quality to the classes and to the students that you're able to tell. Marc, I want to go back to you. You've already talked a little bit about where the idea came from for forming the Musicians Hangout. Why do you think, or have you come across, in terms of the reception and the attendance of the group? I had the pleasure of going to one of your meetings, and I met quite a few people. Not only, are they musicians, but they're performing artists. So where do you see kind of diversity in your group? How do you want that to grow?
So my vision would be that anyone who identifies as a musician and has any interest in meeting other musicians, this would be like a place you would go to make that happen and have all the kinds of conversations we're having here. Could be shop talk about, what chord do you use on that one song over there? Or it could be, what's a good venue to play at? Or it could be, what brand of guitar do you, whatever it is, it's all of these types of discussions happen when you get musicians together, but if the musicians aren't getting together, then they're not happening. And so my first thought was, we just need to have a place for people to get together and have these conversations. I don't know what they're going to talk about. I'm not trying to impose anything. I just want to create the venue for it. So that was the first thought. And then the thing that I struggle with is, I only knew the musicians that I knew who is my background being primarily in jazz with some classical. That's kind of who I knew. And so that's who the first few people to show up were. And then I was like, well, I would really love to be able to be reaching out to all sorts of other worlds that I'm not currently connected to. That's what I want to have happen. But so far, I don't really know how to do that. It happens occasionally. Someone will show up and I'm like, oh, thank you, and tell your friends. And
and that happened actually at that meeting. Like, I talked to 2 or 3 people that came because of someone else, the word of mouth. And so I think still kind of on a boots on the ground grassroots level, that's still how things happen a lot. And in terms of definitely in the music world and the art world, that's how things happen most often.
Yes. And so I definitely am just hoping that as word continues to spread, you know, a more diverse group of musicians show up and it becomes what people want it to become. That said, in parallel with that, there's so many things that happen. All these connections lead to so many other things happening. And among the many things that have been happening lately is pretty early on in my inquiries, trying to figure out what was going on, I was asking, well, you know, where's the music organizations? What's happening? Someone told me about the Creative Consortium of Pueblo, and so I started showing up for their meetings, and they're mostly focused on visual art, which is part of this whole infrastructure that exists. And so I got to know people through there, and they were like, yeah, no, we're open to having music represented here. It just hasn't really happened yet. And so eventually a chair opening. They have like 5 chairs of the organization. One of those positions became available, and I ended up taking that. So I'm now one of the chairs of that organization, and I'm kind of making it my priority to represent music. And simultaneously with that, they decided they want to start these committees to be a little more autonomous doing things. And I'm like, okay, we're going to have a music committee. And so then I started trying to have like music committee meetings and having a mailing list of who was going to do that. And then I was like, well, let's just have that meeting at the Hangout, and that way people are there.
Makes sense.
And then I'm realizing, well, I'm thinking of these as 2 separate things, and I'm trying to promote them as 2 separate things, and it's doing nothing but confusing people. And so now I'm like, well, okay, maybe it's just one and the same thing. Maybe everyone who's a musician has an interest in doing the things that this music, because I saw this music committee as being, you know, not just, I see the Hangout as being getting people together and just letting things happen.
Right.
I see
it's like an informal networking almost, yeah.
Whereas I see this music committee from the Creative Consortium as being more about, well, let's have an agenda. Let's make things happen. But maybe those aren't separate after all. Maybe it's, you know, things happen because the people who want to let them happen, I don't know, you know, it just happens.
Yeah.
And whether it happened ground up or top down, it doesn't actually matter where the idea came from.
It kind of morphs out of the conversations that the people have amongst themselves.
Yes.
In terms of what they're talking about, in terms of like, oh, well, I heard this, or I want to do this. And so it just kind of naturally progresses.
So that's what I'm seeing is happening, is I see the Hangout as an event, a twice monthly event continuing, but having, in addition to this sort of really informal focus, well, let's also have a component of what we're doing that is a little more focused, and maybe that's not just limited to twice monthly events at Analogue, but we actually have, you know, offline discussions through mailing lists or whatever else, so that we can do things like planning of events and so forth, because we've got all sorts of ideas that get talked about. Got this a whole list of like ideas of things that we've talked about that would be interesting,
amazing
to
have happen.
And but when you have these informal gatherings, they're mostly brainstorming sessions, not planning sessions by design. But the planning does have to happen, and so yeah, we're looking at what that really means and how to make room for the actual planning of all the things that we talk about. Do you think that
since, because you've talked about it before in terms of how the established structure of visual art support exists in Pueblo, do you feel like you could use that as a template for making something like that happen for the music scene here? Like, for example, Steel City Music Showcase, which is, you know, was last year the inaugural year, or was it the second year? Brock.
This spring was the second year.
Okay. That's what I thought. So in terms of, and looking at like a schematic or like a template for making things happen like that for musicians in Pueblo and the surrounding area. Do you think that's using some type of foundation like that to make that grow, to make the showcase grow?
And that's one of you hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do with Steel City Music Showcase right now. And we've already been doing that, but we're trying to bolster representing local musicians within the event, because I think the type of event it would be, we want to have it regional. It can't probably be all Pueblo musicians, but we want the Pueblo musicians to be represented and to have a voice. So we're doing two things. One, we're bringing musicians onto our board, and two, we're having a musician outreach team to speak with people and to bring in the voice of local musicians on how to steer the Steel City Music Showcase, because the first year, the biggest feedback or complaint that I received for Steel City Music Showcase is there wasn't enough Pueblo music. So we very purposely, the second year, included more of the correct Pueblo music. And Jesse McCoy from Mineral Palace, who books the bands at Analogue, really was helpful with that. And so I think it's these building connections that are already there within Pueblo, because Pueblo has such a robust art scene, has such a robust punk and metal scene, but they tend to be kind of isolated. So what I try to do is identify areas that could be connected. My biggest, what I like most about Marc's Friday event is that I'm seeing students from CSU Pueblo come down.
Right, yes, there were quite a few from CSUP.
My friend Mateo, who I know from there, was coming down. And then this, just the connection of Steel City Music Showcase to the local musicians and getting their voices heard and any complaints that they might have addressed. I
think it's also important that within that infrastructure, much like there has been support for artists in terms of teaching them these skills of how to market themselves, how to create their resume, how to put themselves out to galleries, how to, just create visibility for themselves, would work in the same way for musicians in terms of, some of these, like, for example, Steel City Music Showcase might be the first biggest gig for a Pueblo musician. So all the things that go with that in terms of like A to Z, it's like, okay, when you communicate with a venue, what do you do? When you communicate, and I know, Aaron, you've had some experience doing this as well. So tell me a little bit about, like, in terms of supporting musicians, how do you think, and Marc, you can chime in here too as well, do you feel like there is an aspect to kind of these, like, maybe workshops for musicians that could learn in terms of how to create visibility and market themselves? Yeah. If they're starting out?
So I think,
or even if they're established, how to build on.
Right. Yeah, I have a unique perspective in some instances because I work on a very sort of high-level executive role for entertainment companies and booking and management. And then I'm also a musician myself, right, as a violinist.
Which I love to, I'm so sad that I missed your lecture at the Heritage Museum. Oh my God!
Well, let me tell you, there's one coming up in more Beulah, to come at the Beulah Historical Society next week, and then between September 25th and October 11th, I have 7 that I'm giving the libraries here hired me to do one at every branch.
Nice, awesome.
So
very cool.
I was just the All Pueblo Reads.
Oh yes,
the All Pueblo Reads.
Okay, yes.
It's a book about
the violin conspiracy. It's the book. I'm reading it right now. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Pueblo Library District.
Thank you, Marc.
Anytime I can shout out.
I forgot about that important
to the library district.
So they asked me to do that lecture because that's the book, and so I'll be giving. So you have many opportunities.
Yay! Okay, I'm excited
there
now.
Should be some marketing coming out about that. Yes. And just for anybody who's listening who might be confused about this crazy violin thing, there is a violin maker and a violinist in Greeley, Colorado named George Fisk. He was one of the pioneers of Greeley. It was the Union colony at the time. He moved to Greeley in 1871 with the original caravan to start the city with Nathan Meeker after Horace Greeley, who was the editor of the Tribune in New York, had given them money and said, go out there and do this. He was a very talented pattern maker, and he was in the Civil War. He played the tenor cornet at the Battle of Bull Run. A very interesting person. And he started making violins in Greeley, and a guy by the name of Edward Remenyi, who was a famous Hungarian violinist and was really good friends with Franz Liszt. And he was actually Franz Liszt engraver and orchestrator. And he also he's the man who is credited for discovering Brahms. Brahms became famous because Brahms was his emergency pianist at one point for a concert
his
in
backup.
Austria. Yes. And so anyway, Fisk starts making these violins, and Remenyi comes through on a vaudeville circuit because he loves the United States. And he also fought in the Austro-Hungarian War when he was very young, and Hungary loses, in case you don't know about history. So he's exiled, and a lot of Europe doesn't like him for a while. So he's in the United States, and Colorado and Pueblo and Greeley, I mean, such rich history because the railroad controlled everything. Sure. And the railroad came from Chicago to Cheyenne, straight down to Pueblo, and then west. That's the only way you could get to California, was basically this route through Colorado. And so everybody who is anybody has stopped at Union Station, back in the day.
In Denver.
In Pueblo. I mean, Denver was like a flyover. Like, people didn't even know what Denver was in the mid 1800s and late 1800s. There's a whole story behind that too. But he came through Greeley, and Greeley at the time had 3 of the country's best opera houses, which people don't think about Greeley for that. But he stopped and he gave one of his performances, and Fisk sort of like jumped in when he was leaving and said, I make violins. Here, try this one. And so the story goes, the violin sounded beautiful, but wasn't a violin. He had the wrong pattern. So it wasn't actually the correct dimensions. The neck was long. I have one for my lecture that is from 1878, before he had a proper pattern, which is his 28th violin that he made. And then I also have his 128th violin made in 1908, which is a good pattern. Remenyi says, this is kind of not a great instrument. It sounds great. He gives him one of his violins and says, pattern off of this. This is a copy of a Strad. He comes back 14 months later, loves them, orders a bunch, takes them all over the world. Franz Liszt owned a couple of these before he dies. Governor Benjamin Eaton, which the one that I have was a gift to his family. It's a really great story, and he was called the Stradivarius of the West, and they're very important instruments to the United States and to Western music, and I am the last living published researcher on these instruments.
Oh my God, and you live here in Pueblo.
Yes, well, I worked for many years with the real expert, Peggy Ford Waldo. Unfortunately, she passed away of a stroke in the middle of us putting a book together, so that's what I'm trying to finish up as a book.
Fantastic.
But anybody who's confused about that, so... As far as getting gigs, actually one thing that I talk a lot about is like the specialization. I'm getting a lot of gigs for Fisk because I have this weird specialization with these instruments. I am working on a book and I've done all this research on it, so there's that aspect. But what we also see in the entertainment industry at large is that analytics and numbers are really driving things now. And I was part of the movement. My agency started working with some really big players probably about 8 years ago, when people started really looking at digital analytics as something they should pay attention to for booking people. And
as a formula, in terms of like not booking, in terms of how much we're going to pay you, what the percentages are, where this money goes within the house, how it's distributed to the artist, all of those things.
And it's kind of almost actuary work. They do risk assessment based off of the popularity analytics that we're seeing online. And my agency was one of the agencies who sort of started that a little bit at the beginning, when we were looking at how to differentiate and find talent that maybe people were overlooking, or some talent that was legacy talent that was asking for way too much in guarantees, and they're walking away from a venue, and the venue's going, we made no money.
We made nothing, yeah.
And so they were asking us through marketing, they said, well, you can see things like how many times people are mentioned online, whether it's good or bad, which is called sentiment analysis, when you run basically analysis of the entire internet, how often a band or a person is mentioned, and then it's a -1 to a +1 metric. So how positive or negative the average of all of the comments are that are being said online, which...
And does that contribute to how the money is distributed?
Yes. Yeah, so we take a look at this and we would say, okay, maybe there's a festival lineup, or there's they're looking to book for a venue, and they say, hey, we've narrowed it down to these musicians and bands. Which ones will make us the most money? And so there's an in-the-door effect where we would actually look at all of these metrics, social media, Google Analytics, Google Trends, all of these things, and we would say, okay, this band is going to probably make the most money. And then they'd say, okay, what's our risk assessment here? Like, we did all these bands. What's the % chance we're going to break even? What's the % chance that we're going to make a 20% margin, a 50% margin, an 80% margin? And we would forecast all of that out. And based off of that risk assessment on whatever deal they're trying to do, they would figure out, like, okay, we're not going to give you the guarantee you want. It's going to be less, or the split's going to be different, or maybe they'll tack on a drink minimum at the bar for the venue. And so it allows the venues to mitigate their risk. But at the same time, if you're an artist, you can lean into this and focus on some of these metrics and trying to really be sort of known and talked about online in a way that you really build a community and an audience that is recognizable. Because a lot of times, there's this tug of war all the time, where the venue's always trying to say you're worth less than you are, and you're always trying to say you're worth more than you are. Right. And so we
have 1 million followers on Instagram, so
exactly.
It's like...
And there's truth somewhere in that middle. And so that's what we were doing, is we created these formulas and these equations and algorithms that would help to determine these types of things. And, there's simple things that talent can be doing to... I mean, one of the biggest things for a venue is just to have content and an EPK ready to go, a media kit. So when they say, what are we going to say about you? Give us some good photos. What's the marketing material? You have it in
press
a way.
kit. That's like,
Boom.
yeah, I mean, those are things that...
A press kit's so important.
I mean, it's like, I don't know. And, and I have a little bit of knowledge because my husband used to do booking for rockabilly bands, and in Ohio and Southern California, and so he went on tour. Also, he had an opportunity to do bookings for tours for this one band. Great guys, and it's not just about calling up the venue saying, "Okay, we're free on that date," and it's an over the phone handshake. It's not just about that anymore. It's big business, and especially if you're a major act.
Yes.
I can remember, and maybe you can too, when you went out, in terms of, band, booking bands in the 90s or going on tour with the band, the logistics of it all happening. You just don't show up in your van anymore and say, we're here. What time did we go on? It's like there's got to be a contract. There's a press kit. It's like I got to send pictures out to this place ahead of time. I have to do all this pre. And so, it's changed dramatically. But these are things that musicians that want to get into the business need to know about, in terms of all that. I'm going to take a quick break. This has been an amazing conversation. This has been an amazing podcast. I'm going to take a quick break, and with thanks to our sponsors, Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, I just want to thank them for sponsoring our podcast. So we'll just be right back.
Homeownership is possible with a trusted partner.
It brings us a lot of joy to be able to say that this house is our own and that we've poured our hearts into making it our own.
Alyssa and Ryan are among the more than 155,000 people Chaffa has helped become homeowners since 1974. It starts with homebuyer education and connecting you with a statewide network of participating lenders. Get started at chfainfo.com/yourhome. Chaffa is an equal housing lender.
Okay, we're back, and thank you so much again. If you're just joining us for the podcast, I'm here with Marc Sabatella, Aaron Zimola, and Brock Kilgore. We're talking about our community focus on the Pueblo Musicians Meetup, and we have had an amazing discussion about the ins and outs of being a musician, about bringing visibility for the music scene here in Pueblo, talking about the Steel City Music Showcase and like what's to come for that. What I'm interested in is knowing about Marc, talk to me about like some collaborations that you have going on, some maybe future plans that you have going on for, other than, I'm going to play the lottery and give you all my money so you can open a new music venue in Pueblo. Yeah. Tell me about some of the things that you have going on right now.
Sure. There's a lot. It's funny because I've now been using the analogy of fishing. If you see people people who fish a lot, maybe you have a whole bunch of poles and you cast them all out and then you put them in your holder and then you kind of wait for one of them to bite. I spent a year casting out all these fishing poles, sitting there waiting for it to bite, and then over the last 3 months, boom, 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 they're all biting.
It's fishing season.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to sort. Oh my gosh, what can I prioritize here? So there's so many different things. One of them, I would want to circle back to something you had asked about, like what can we borrow from the art world? Well, I keep mentioning First Friday. An obvious thing is, well, what if there was Second Saturday or Third Thursday or some sort of weekly event? And when you think about what First Friday is, it's a wonderful almost non-event because no one has to plan it. The galleries just stay open later than they otherwise would.
It's like a non-verbal, it really is in terms of the first Fridays in Art Walk, and it's like a long-standing tradition. People know it's First Friday. Mm-hmm. If it's nice out, it's weather permitting, we're going to go do this.
And each gallery does, as you know from having kind of ran the show last week, each gallery has work to do, but you didn't have to coordinate with the other galleries to make that happen. That just sort of happened already, and it didn't really take a lot.
It's like an open house, yeah.
And so if it was a similar thing for music, where different venues that were having music, yes, they each have to book their own music and figure that out. But what if there was like a day when all these venues, we knew they're going to have music, and then we just made it an event for people to go see them? So this is an idea that some cities have done with some success, and we're looking at trying to do something like that. We're not necessarily ready to announce anything.
Please do.
Yet, but that will happen. And so that's one thing. Another thing is I'll switch gears entirely to the fishing thing. One of the lines that has been hitting now is I realized at some point in talking to people at CSU Pueblo, where I'm teaching an aural skills, an ear training course there, but it was sort of months in the process of we think we're going to want you to do this. Oh, we're not sure we're going to have enough students, blah, blah, blah. And so during that time in talking to people, suddenly I just sort of became aware that, well, what about PCC? They don't actually really do anything in music. So I started talking to them, and then they were like, yeah, well, we might want to do something in the future. And then one day, a week later, I got a call. Oh, actually, we need you right now. So because there's one class that we teach, and the person who was teaching it retired. So I am teaching a music appreciation class there, but what's the exciting part about that is they are very interested in expanding to actually build some form of music program. And
that's amazing.
I am thrilled with this because to me, a community college is exactly where these things should be happening, in the sense that then not just people who are full-time music students and, getting a 4-year degree in music, anyone can potentially participate in classes and ensembles and so forth. There's a much lower barrier to entry. So, we're not, again,
accessibility.
We don't have,
I think that's the key in terms of letting those people do.
So we're looking at building that program up, and it'll be a gradual process, but the process is now starting. And then there's also the idea. So the Steel City Music Showcase is this fantastic annual event, and it's great that it's adding more local music. But, we want more things happening. And one of the things when I mentioned this crossbreeding between genres, a lot of this happened because of I was in Fort Collins for a number of years, which is a town roughly at the time the same size as Pueblo. But there were a few venues that kind of made it a point of being very genre independent or genre agnostic, and they would have a classical group one time, a jazz group the next time, bluegrass the next time, punk the next time, and they would have these little festivals. And one place in particular had 3 different stages at one venue, Avogadro's Number, fantastic place. And so they would put on festivals, and all the musicians would interact. And of course, radio was a thing then too. I mean, radio still exists, but not the way it did in the 90s, you know? So the idea that there was all these things happening that helped the music scene there, and I'm trying to think, well, what could we borrow from that here? Well, one is having more of these smaller events than the music showcase, but bigger than just a First Friday kind of informal thing, but a semi-formal thing. And so there's a couple different initiatives. There's a guy named Reed Miller here who's looking at starting an event that would be a music walk kind of thing in October. This is still in the planning stages. It's coming up quick, and
that would be next month.
Yeah, it would be next month, and so we'll see what happens with that. But it's based on his is based on a model that's from Ames, Iowa, where he had formerly lived, and so he's trying to follow that model. One other random program that I've started that's now taking a lot of traction is the idea of street pianos. Like Denver on 6th Street Mall and other places have had pianos just sitting there. Fort Collins also has a program like that where there's just pianos out in
Trinidad,
public.
Colorado has that as well.
Really? I didn't know
they
that.
have
I'll have to
random
check that
pianos
out.
sitting out in Trinidad. This was several years ago, but they had, I think, at least 2 throughout the city. One was at the end of Commercial Street. The other one was someplace on Main Street. And they were outside of businesses, and they invited people to, and they have a First Friday Art Walk as well. And so people would just randomly sit down and play, and have a gathering.
So we're going to be creating that
and
here
it's Trinidad.
as well.
There's like 12,000 people in that county. It's very tiny. So it's possible.
So yeah, we're going through the city channels to get the appropriate permissions and all that. And CSU's got some pianos they're actually trying to get rid of because they're changing over pianos in the practice rooms, and they're totally on board. They were looking at this independently, really. And then I happened to mention to someone there who I had no idea had any connection to that. She's like, "Oh my God, I'm trying to get rid of 6 pianos right now." And I was talking to the people here on campus about putting them. And so now we're working together on this. And so all these things are all just sort of coming together, but they're the common threads are musicians want more places to play. We want it to be easier for people to find us, and that was a conversation we had earlier about where do people find out about music, and trying to see, and Brock's got something that he's working on to try to make it easier to find where performances are. I'm out of breath just telling you about all the ideas we are talking about.
People. I mean, basically the opening of my talk about this featuring the Pueblo Musicians meetup or hangout was that people are asking me all the time. What is there to do in Pueblo? What is there? Like everybody knows about the First Friday Art Walk. Sometimes now there's a closing receptions and such. But in between there, people are like, what's to do? There's always, where can I go? I want to see this type of music, or I want to see art, or what's going on, or I want to become involved, or all these things. And, it just takes, like we talked about before, more doers, more people that want to make things happen. The other thing that I think would be an ideal situation with what you're talking about, Mark, is the concept of adaptive reuse is in Pueblo, especially with the buildings that are still here. There are a lot of buildings that are in key locations in Pueblo that are vacant. And so everybody knows where that place is. Everybody knows where that corner is. It's a really popular gathering space, or it was the place that used to be there that closed. It was an institution for blah, blah, blah years, and they closed. So why not, be able to offer music pop-ups or, those types of things throughout the city on a second Saturday, or a second Friday or something like that. Even into the autumn, early fall, early winter, it's still beautiful here. You're still very able to go around town in the evening and do things. And, that's I'm just throwing it out there because between the 4 of us, we've got a lots of ideas, So Brock, let me ask you about like what's on tap for the Steel City Music Showcase coming up.
We have quite a few things going on. I suppose the biggest thing is that next year we're going to do a community stage. We've partnered with some local educators, Carolyn Morrison, who is in charge of something she described as the School of Rock in the elementary and middle schools.
Awesome.
So she is in charge of the music stage and has partnered with Guitar Center. And so we're going to start earlier on Saturday and have local musicians from local bands and have a community stage that's free before the event. So I think that's the biggest new thing with Steel City, but I'll say the same thing that I say in every Steel City Music Showcase board meeting. The biggest thing we need to do is just keep being ourselves and do what we do and do it well. And that's what I say to every single class that I teach, and it's really what I strive to do, is to lead by example and just being myself and doing the things that I do and trying to do them well. I'd really like to do two things. You kind of, the question was what are future directions? So one of them, I would like to get connected or help out the arts, and not that the arts need help, but sometimes I see missing connections or missing opportunities. You're speaking of old buildings. So my second favorite festival, it's hard to say what favorite festival in Denver. I used to live there and I love the festivals, but I used to love the Five Points Jazz Festival, and the Rossonian Hotel has such a wonderful story, and it's not a protected building, as you probably know. But my favorite festival is the Chalk Art Festival, and I'm on the Pueblo Arts Alliance board, and I'm trying to help out as much as I can, but I'm always a little bit overwhelmed by that community because I'm used to music and not necessarily art. So what I do is
they're intertwined if you think about it. I mean, really, it's the creative world. So it's really intertwined all the time.
So at one of the meetings, I said, I think the space around the Liminal Space Gallery downtown would be perfect area for a chalk art festival because it has a good contrast between old buildings and new buildings. And that's what I like the most about downtown Denver's chalk art, because it has Larimer Square and then the tall buildings, and it just looks cool. So I had an idea. I said it in a meeting, and they picked it up. And so here,
I saw that on their calendar.
On the 27th, we'll have that Chalk Art Fest, and that allows me to grow as a person because I have ideas. I can't do them all on my own. And Christina McCann from Pueblo Arts Alliance picked it up and did the whole thing. I have yet to move any heavy stuff, but I'm sure I will on Saturday.
Sometimes you need a break from that. You need to lift your brain rather than like amps.
I'm trying to move to more the music side of it, of the Steel City Music Showcase, and move less stuff. But the other idea I have, and where I'll finish here, is after the Steel City Music Showcase, I started seeing lots of live music in Pueblo, and it was really hard to find what was going on. And I spent sometimes 2 hours a weekend on my phone figuring out what's going on. So I had this idea that I think could really connect nodes, and I'm calling it El Pueblo Unido, and I'm wanting it to be just a small, like 8x8 or 10x10 print rag that just shows what the music is, or the important arts events of that weekend, and have it as a weekly publication. And I mentioned that to Jesse McCoy from Mineral Palace, who books the music at Analogue and has Bedfire Records, and he said, we should model it out of the DIY punk world and also include a listing of all of the venues, the t-shirt guy, the person who can make tapes or CDs, so that musicians who are new to town or are already here will connect those nodes that tend to be unconnected for cultural reasons. I think Pueblo's been around for a really long time. That's the big difference between Colorado Springs and Pueblo.
Right.
I mean, there's been families here for a really long time, and
Hundreds
Colorado
of years,
Springs, and especially Black Forest, where I'm from, there's very few people.
I think in terms of your idea, I think that would promote more venues to come out and to open, or more venues that are created so they can host more musicians. And I think that's also in terms of bringing visibility to a more diverse music scene here, not only with punk rock, bluegrass or whatever, but also classical and jazz, which jazz, especially in terms of conversations with people that I know across many different areas that they are familiar with the jazz scene, or they've been immersed in a jazz scene, and there is a desire here to have a more regular jazz musicians or performances.
I think a jazz club would be fantastic. One of
Yeah.
my favorite parts of Denver was going to the 5 p.m. or the 7 p.m., putting on a tie and enjoying the jazz.
So,
you know?
So if anybody out there is listening to my podcast and wants to help fund a jazz club or a jazz pop-up, email me. But I just want to thank the three of you for being with me today. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. Brock, Aaron, and Mark, I want to thank you so much. And that's another episode of State of Art. I'm Bree Pappan, and thank you so much for joining us.